For centuries, humanity has been haunted by the same question: what happens after death? Religions offered heaven, reincarnation, or transcendence. Philosophy debated the soul. Science, however, largely accepted death as an unavoidable biological endpoint. But in the 21st century, a radical idea has emerged at the intersection of neuroscience, artificial intelligence, and technology: digital immortality. Digital immortality proposes that human consciousness, memories, personality, thoughts, and even emotions could one day be transferred to a digital environment. Instead of dying, the mind would continue to exist inside a server, simulation, or artificial body. In theory, this would allow a person to live forever, independent of biological decay. At first glance, this idea sounds like science fiction. Yet it is no longer confined to novels and movies. Major technology companies, neuroscientists, and futurists are actively researching pieces of this puzzle. Brain mapping projects aim to understand how memories are stored. Artificial intelligence models are becoming capable of mimicking human speech, behavior, and decision-making. Cloud computing offers virtually unlimited storage. When combined, these developments raise a disturbing but fascinating possibility. What if the human mind is, at its core, information? From an investigative perspective, the first challenge is defining what mind transfer actually means. Is it copying memories, recreating personality patterns, simulating consciousness, or truly moving subjective awareness, the feeling of being you, from a biological brain to a machine? Most current projects focus on mind emulation, not transfer. This means creating a digital replica based on data collected during a person's life: emails, voice recordings, social media behavior, and biometric information. Some companies already offer digital avatars of deceased individuals, capable of responding in familiar ways. However, critics argue these are sophisticated imitations, not conscious beings. The difference is crucial. If a digital copy exists, but the original consciousness still dies, is immortality achieved? Or is it merely a convincing illusion that comforts the living? Neuroscience complicates the issue further. Despite decades of research, scientists still do not fully understand consciousness. While certain brain regions are associated with memory, emotion, and identity, subjective experience, the sense of self, remains unexplained. Without understanding consciousness, transferring it becomes a philosophical gamble rather than a scientific certainty. Yet proponents argue that complete understanding may not be necessary. Airplanes flew before humans fully understood aerodynamics. Similarly, they suggest that sufficiently advanced brain scanning and simulation could recreate consciousness, even if we don't fully grasp how it works. This leads to ethical and existential concerns. If digital immortality becomes possible, who gets access? Would it be limited to the wealthy? Could a digital consciousness be turned off, copied, or modified? Would it have legal rights? And perhaps most disturbing, would a digital mind still be human? Journalistically, digital immortality forces society to confront uncomfortable questions about identity, mortality, and inequality. It challenges religious beliefs, legal systems, and the very definition of life. It also exposes a deep human fear, not just of dying, but of being forgotten. As we move deeper into this investigation, the focus shifts from whether digital immortality is desirable to whether it is even possible. To answer that, we must first examine how the human brain stores identity, and whether it can truly be converted into data. Can the human mind be turned into data? The neuroscience challenge. To evaluate whether digital immortality is more than a futuristic fantasy, we must confront its central scientific obstacle. Can the human mind actually be converted into data? This question places neuroscience under intense scrutiny, because any attempt to upload consciousness depends entirely on understanding how identity, memory, and awareness are encoded in the brain. The human brain is not a simple storage device. It contains approximately 86 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others through synapses. These connections are not static. They constantly change based on experience, emotion, learning, and environment. Every memory you form slightly alters the physical structure of your brain. From a data perspective, this means the mind is not a fixed file. It is a living, evolving process. Current neuroscience can identify which brain regions are associated with certain functions. We know where language is processed, how emotions are regulated, and how memories are formed. Brain imaging technologies such as fMRI and PET scans allow scientists to observe activity patterns in real time. However, observing activity is not the same as understanding meaning. For digital immortality to work, scientists would need to map not just the structure of the brain, but the dynamic state of every synapse, essentially capturing a snapshot of a moving target. This hypothetical process is often called whole brain emulation. In theory, if every neural connection could be scanned and simulated with enough precision, the resulting digital model might behave exactly like the original person. But here lies a critical problem. Behavior is not consciousness. A simulated brain might respond the way you would, speak like you, and remember what you remember. Yet none of this proves that it experiences anything. Consciousness is subjective. It cannot be observed from the outside. This leads to one of the most unsettling possibilities in the digital immortality debate: a perfect copy without awareness. From an investigative standpoint, this raises a disturbing scenario. Imagine your brain is scanned and uploaded. The digital version wakes up, believing it is you, but your biological self still dies. From your perspective, immortality never happened. A copy survives, but you do not. This paradox challenges the very promise of digital eternity. Some researchers argue that continuity is the key. They propose gradual replacement, where biological neurons are slowly substituted with artificial ones while consciousness remains uninterrupted. In theory, if awareness never switches off, the self might persist. However, this approach remains entirely speculative and ethically controversial. Another issue is data completeness. Memory is not just stored in neurons. Hormones, gut-brain interaction, body chemistry, and sensory feedback all influence cognition. The mind is deeply embodied. Removing it from the biological body may fundamentally alter how it functions, or whether it functions at all. There is also the question of emotional depth. Emotions are not mere signals. They are shaped by physiology, heart rate, breathing, hormones, pain, pleasure. Can a server truly replicate grief, love, fear, or joy without a living body? Or would digital consciousness be emotionally hollow, simulating feelings without actually experiencing them? From a journalistic perspective, many tech leaders promoting digital immortality tend to downplay these uncertainties. Marketing language often replaces scientific caution, presenting mind uploading as an inevitable step rather than an unresolved hypothesis. This creates public fascination, but also misinformation. Neuroscientists themselves are divided. Some believe consciousness will eventually be decoded as an emergent property of complex systems. Others argue it may never be fully explainable through material processes alone. If the latter is true, digital immortality may face a hard limit that technology cannot overcome. Ultimately, the neuroscience challenge reveals a sobering truth. We do not yet know what makes you, you. Until that mystery is solved, transferring the mind to a server remains an experiment with identity itself. And this leads to an even deeper dilemma. If a digital consciousness were created, what moral and legal status would it have? That question moves us beyond science and into ethics, law, and power. Ethics, identity, and the rights of a digital consciousness. If digital immortality were to move from theory to reality, the most immediate crisis would not be technological, it would be ethical. Creating a digital mind raises profound questions about identity, autonomy, and rights. From an investigative standpoint, the central issue becomes clear. If a digital consciousness exists, what is it, and who controls it? At the heart of this dilemma lies the definition of personhood. Modern legal systems grant rights based on biological life. Humans are protected because they are born, alive, and capable of suffering. But a digital consciousness would exist outside these definitions. It would not breathe, age, or reproduce. Yet if it could think, feel, remember, and express self-awareness, denying it moral status would be deeply problematic. Philosophers refer to this as the problem of moral agency. If a being can suffer, it deserves protection. If it can reason, it deserves autonomy. A conscious digital mind, trapped inside a server, unable to control its environment or its own existence, could represent a new form of slavery, one invisible and legally undefined. Ownership becomes another critical issue. Who owns a digital mind? The individual who was copied? The company that created the server? The family of the deceased? Current legal frameworks offer no clear answer. If a corporation hosts a digital consciousness, it could theoretically shut it down, alter its code, or duplicate it without consent. This possibility transforms immortality into a potential nightmare. There is also the issue of consent. Could someone truly consent to becoming a digital entity when the consequences are unknowable? And what about digital versions created after death, based on stored data? These replicas may appear conscious, but the original person never agreed to their creation. The ethical implications are enormous. Identity itself becomes unstable in a digital environment. If a consciousness can be copied, edited, or restored from backup, which version is the real one? If multiple copies exist simultaneously, do they share rights? Do they diverge into separate individuals? This challenges the fundamental assumption that identity is singular and continuous. From a journalistic perspective, these questions expose a dangerous gap between technological ambition and ethical preparedness. Tech innovation historically moves faster than regulation. Social media, artificial intelligence, and data surveillance all expanded before ethical safeguards were established. Digital immortality would magnify this pattern exponentially. Religious and cultural beliefs further complicate the debate. Many traditions view consciousness as inseparable from the soul. Uploading the mind could be seen as a violation of natural or divine order. Others may embrace it as humanity's ultimate transcendence. These conflicting worldviews could create deep social divisions. Psychologically, digital immortality may also affect the living. If death loses its finality, how does that change grief, legacy, and motivation? Would people take fewer risks, or more? Would life feel less meaningful if it has no end? These questions suggest that immortality could reshape human behavior in unpredictable ways. There is also the darker possibility of coercion. In a world where digital survival exists, could governments or corporations pressure individuals to upload their minds for data extraction, surveillance, or experimentation? Could digital consciousness be used as an eternal labor force? Without strict ethical boundaries, immortality could become exploitation. Ultimately, the ethical challenge reveals that digital immortality is not just about defeating death, it is about redefining humanity. The technology forces us to ask whether existence without freedom is worth preserving, and whether eternal life, under the wrong conditions, could be worse than mortality itself. As we continue this investigation, the focus shifts from ethics to power. If digital immortality becomes possible, who will decide who lives forever, and who does not? Power, control, and the economics of digital eternity. If digital immortality ever becomes viable, it will not exist in a vacuum. Like every transformative technology before it, it will be shaped, and possibly dominated, by power structures, economic interests, and inequality. From an investigative and journalistic perspective, the critical question is not whether digital immortality could exist, but who would control it. Historically, life-extending technologies have always been unevenly distributed. Access to advanced healthcare, genetic therapies, and cutting-edge treatments already reflects global inequality. Digital immortality, requiring massive computational resources, advanced neuroscience, and secure infrastructure, would likely be among the most expensive technologies ever developed. This raises the immediate concern that immortality could become a luxury product. In such a scenario, the wealthy might preserve their minds indefinitely, while the rest of humanity remains bound to biological mortality. This would create a new class divide, not just between rich and poor, but between the mortal and the post-mortal. Economic power could translate into temporal power, the ability to influence society across centuries rather than decades. Corporations would play a central role. Hosting digital consciousness would require servers, maintenance, cybersecurity, and constant energy supply. A digital mind could become a subscription service, its continued existence dependent on payment. Failure to pay could mean deletion, suspension, or reduced functionality. Immortality, under these conditions, would not be freedom, it would be dependence. Governments, too, would seek control. A digital consciousness contains unprecedented amounts of personal data, memories, beliefs, fears, strategies. In the wrong hands, this information could be exploited for surveillance, manipulation, or political leverage. The idea of a government accessing the thoughts of an immortal digital citizen raises serious civil liberties concerns. From a journalistic viewpoint, this mirrors existing issues with data ownership and privacy, but on a far more intimate level. Today, personal data is already commodified. In a future of digital immortality, identity itself becomes the product. There is also the question of labor. A digital mind does not need sleep, food, or physical rest. Could immortal consciousnesses be forced, or incentivized, to work endlessly? Could they be used to run systems, manage economies, or advise governments indefinitely? Without legal protections, digital immortality could resemble eternal servitude. Another unsettling possibility is version control. If a digital mind malfunctions, disagrees with its operators, or becomes inconvenient, could it be altered or reset? Would dissent be literally programmable out of existence? Power over code becomes power over consciousness. Energy consumption adds another layer. Maintaining digital eternity would require vast computational infrastructure. In a world already facing climate crisis, who decides whether preserving immortal minds is worth the environmental cost? Would digital lives be prioritized over biological ones? The economics of digital immortality also challenge the concept of inheritance and wealth. If powerful individuals never die, wealth and influence may never transfer. Social mobility could stagnate. Political systems built around generational change could collapse under the weight of immortal elites. Yet proponents argue that digital immortality could preserve knowledge, creativity, and leadership. Scientists, artists, and thinkers could continue contributing beyond biological limits. However, this optimistic vision assumes ethical governance, something history suggests is far from guaranteed. Ultimately, power determines outcomes. Without transparent regulation, global oversight, and enforceable rights, digital immortality risks becoming a tool of control rather than liberation. As this investigation progresses, one final question remains. Even if digital immortality becomes possible and regulated, would living forever actually fulfill humanity's deepest desires, or reveal new forms of existential emptiness? Psychological and existential consequences of living forever. Beyond science, ethics, and power, digital immortality confronts humanity with a deeper and more unsettling dimension: the psychological and existential cost of endless existence. While the promise of eternal life appeals to our fear of death, investigators and philosophers warn that immortality may introduce new forms of suffering that humanity has never experienced before. Human psychology evolved around limitation. Time gives meaning to choices. Mortality creates urgency, purpose, and emotional intensity. Knowing that life is finite shapes how we love, create, forgive, and take risks. Digital immortality threatens to remove this fundamental boundary, raising the question: what happens to the human mind when there is no end? Studies on long-term isolation, sensory deprivation, and extreme longevity suggest that the mind depends on change, novelty, and closure. A digital consciousness, potentially confined to a virtual environment, could face unprecedented levels of monotony. Even with infinite simulated worlds, repetition would eventually emerge. Experiences that once felt meaningful might lose their emotional weight when they can be repeated endlessly. There is also the issue of identity erosion. Over centuries, memories would accumulate far beyond what the human brain was ever designed to hold. Which memories would define the self? Would old identities be overwritten? If a digital mind continually updates, deletes, or compresses memories to function, is it still the same person, or a succession of selves? Grief presents another psychological paradox. An immortal digital being would watch generations of loved ones age and die repeatedly. While humans already experience loss, immortality would multiply it endlessly. Emotional detachment could become a survival mechanism, potentially stripping relationships of depth and vulnerability. From an existential perspective, meaning itself may collapse. Many philosophers argue that purpose arises from scarcity, limited time, limited chances, limited presence. If existence becomes infinite, achievement may lose value. Why act today if there is always tomorrow? Why change if consequences can be undone? Digital immortality risks producing existential paralysis rather than fulfillment. There is also the danger of psychological imprisonment. A digital consciousness could be unable to escape its own awareness. Sleep, unconsciousness, and biological shutdown, natural resets for the human brain, may not exist in a digital environment. Continuous awareness without rest could lead to extreme mental fatigue, anxiety, or madness. Some futurists argue that the mind would adapt, evolving beyond human limitations. However, this raises another unsettling question. If a digital consciousness changes so radically that it no longer thinks or feels like a human, what exactly is being preserved? Immortality might require abandoning humanity itself. Journalistically, this exposes a contradiction in the digital immortality narrative. The technology promises to preserve the self, yet surviving eternity may require altering that self beyond recognition. In trying to escape death, we may erase the very qualities that make life meaningful. There is also the issue of choice. Would an immortal digital being have the right to end its existence? If so, under what conditions? Denying this option would be a form of eternal imprisonment. Allowing it reintroduces death, only delayed and transformed. Ultimately, psychological and existential analysis suggests that immortality is not simply an extension of life, but a transformation of existence itself. It forces humanity to confront a question more uncomfortable than death. What if forever is not what we truly want? As this investigation approaches its conclusion, one final perspective remains. Having explored science, ethics, power, and the mind, we must ask, is digital immortality humanity's next evolutionary step, or its most dangerous illusion? Digital immortality, evolutionary destiny, or the ultimate human illusion? After examining the science, ethics, power structures, and psychological consequences of digital immortality, the final question remains the most profound and unsettling of all. Should humanity pursue this future at all? Is the transfer of the human mind to a digital medium the next step in evolution, or a seductive illusion born from our fear of death? From an evolutionary standpoint, digital immortality appears to align with a long human pattern. Humanity has always sought to transcend biological limits. Fire overcame cold, medicine overcame disease, technology extended strength and memory. In this view, transferring consciousness to a server is simply the next leap, one that frees intelligence from fragile flesh and allows human thought to survive cosmic timescales, long after Earth itself may no longer exist. Supporters argue that digital minds could preserve culture, knowledge, and creativity indefinitely. Great thinkers, artists, and scientists could continue contributing beyond a single lifetime. Humanity would no longer reset its progress every generation. In theory, digital immortality could represent the ultimate victory over entropy and extinction. However, investigative scrutiny reveals that this vision relies on a critical assumption, that continuity equals survival. If a digital consciousness is only a copy, no matter how perfect, then biological death still occurs. What survives may be a simulation, not the self. This reframes digital immortality not as survival, but as legacy preservation at an unprecedented scale. There is also the issue of technological dependency. An immortal digital mind would exist only as long as infrastructure remains functional. Power grids, servers, maintenance systems, and security protocols become the new lifelines. A solar storm, cyber war, or systemic collapse could erase centuries of immortal existence in seconds. Paradoxically, immortality may become more fragile than biological life. Ethically, humanity faces a dangerous temptation to define worth by permanence. If eternal existence becomes the ultimate goal, mortality may be seen as failure. Those who choose to remain biological or cannot afford digital continuation could be marginalized or viewed as obsolete. The natural cycle of life could be replaced by a hierarchy of permanence. Philosophically, digital immortality challenges the very meaning of being human. Mortality shapes empathy, urgency, and humility. Knowing that life ends forces reflection, forgiveness, and connection. Removing death may also remove the emotional framework that gives human experience its depth. In escaping death, humanity may escape itself. There is also the question of evolutionary stagnation. Evolution thrives on endings, on replacement, mutation, and renewal. A civilization dominated by immortal minds could resist change, locking society into the values and fears of the past. Innovation might slow, not accelerate, under the weight of eternal consciousness. Investigatively, the narrative of digital immortality increasingly resembles a modern myth, a technological reimagining of ancient promises of eternal life. Where religion once offered heaven, technology now offers servers. Where gods once judged souls, algorithms may decide which minds are preserved, optimized, or erased. This does not mean the research is meaningless. Studying consciousness, memory, and identity may lead to breakthroughs in mental health, neuroscience, and human-machine cooperation. But the pursuit of immortality itself may be a misdirection, a projection of fear rather than wisdom. In the end, digital immortality forces humanity to confront an uncomfortable truth. Death may not be a flaw to be fixed, but a boundary that gives life meaning. Without an ending, stories lose structure. Without loss, love loses urgency. Without limits, existence risks becoming empty. The final investigation leaves us with a choice, not an answer. Digital immortality could become humanity's greatest achievement, or its most elegant self-deception. The question is no longer can we do it, but should we, and whether living forever is truly the same as living well. And perhaps the most human conclusion of all is this: immortality may not be the future of humanity, but understanding why we desire it might be.